Welcome to the Eltropy Exchange podcast, where leaders of community financial institutions connect, learn, and stay ahead. In each episode, we sit down with industry executives, innovators, and experts for candid conversations about the challenges and opportunities shaping CFIs today. At Eltropy, we believe conversations matter. Let's dive in.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the Eltropy Exchange. My name is Mike Pupil, the Vice President of the Collections Business Unit at Eltropy. And I get the great pleasure today to introduce our newest guest, Mike Bridges. Mike Bridges is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Five Star Credit Union. The Dothan, Alabama-based $1.2 billion credit union has 29 financial service centers in Alabama and Georgia, servicing more than 66,000 members. Growing up with a love of journalism, Mike went to the University of Oklahoma, majoring in journalism. He parlayed that into a 17-year career in television that saw him work in Oklahoma City, Lafayette, Indiana, and Kalamazoo, Michigan. Among his favorite parts of TV was hosting the Western Michigan Coaches Show, live sporting events, covering red carpets for TV shows Survivor and Country Music Awards. Mike transitioned out of television and into credit unions, working for the Michigan Credit Union League and the League of Southeastern Credit Unions. In 2016, Five Star had an opening in marketing. Mike made another transition to Dothan. Since then, Mike has been at Five Star. The credit union has grown 3 times larger than when he started, much because of Mike's effort there. Mike is married with one son that is a senior at Auburn, majoring in finance. And as you see, we are rocking jerseys.
Yes.
So, Mike, welcome to the podcast. Honor to have you here. And I'm going to let you not only introduce yourself, but let everybody know why we're rocking a couple of jerseys today.
All right. Sounds good. I couldn't have written that intro any better myself, which, of course, I did write that when I gave it to you. But I'm wearing a jersey. It's an old Emmitt Smith jersey. It's not because the Cowboys have a Netflix series now. It was, we're recording this, it's our homecoming week. What we're calling it is our anniversary week that we have here at Five Star, and we do something different every day. And on Thursdays, we're doing our throwback to the 60s type jerseys and things like that. Obviously, nobody has like anything from the 60s, although one lady did have a Mickey Mantle shirt on. So kudos to her to even know who that is, one, but two, to be able to find it. But it also starts next week. We'll have a tailgate on Friday and then we'll wear our favorite school or high school like jersey shirts and things like that. So it kind of gets us kicked off for football season. Being in Alabama, of course, is big football towns.
For sure. Well, I love it. Right before this podcast, I decided I was going to throw on a jersey as well. I wanted to be part of the fun that you guys are doing. I think it's a great cultural move. I think it makes everybody have a good time, puts smiles on your faces. And the adage is always a happy employee is a productive employee. And I think it's we spend a lot of time working together, so we should have some fun with this. And I don't think I'm going to be able to rock my Boston Bruin jersey very long. I think they're going to be at the bottom of the list.
Well, the Cowboys have started to get themselves into the middle of the pack as well. So hopefully they'll have a good season. But right now, we're excited that they could have a good season. 3 weeks from now, maybe not.
I'll be cheering for you.
Yeah.
So on to our piece. You also have one of the more interesting biographies that I've been able to, kind of go through. Typically, I have always started this podcast on, how did you get into the role that you have? And I absolutely want to do that because you started your career in television, and, covering some events that are, really well known. And now that led you into, working in credit unions. And so this is going to be the most fun question that I have. Tell us the story about how you started in credit unions.
Well, I had a love of, like I put in the intro, I had a love of journalism as a small child, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, wanted to be a baseball announcer, big baseball fan, Cincinnati Reds fan, listened to the baseball a lot on my little radio and everything. And hard to believe back then, only 3 channels, barely had cable or anything like that. And then when I got a chance to go to journalism school and get into television, it was great. I got to do things that I never thought I would get to do. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma, graduated with 75 kids. You just didn't know hardly anybody that had ever, really done anything on a national level. And so had interned and did my first kind of stint in television in Oklahoma City, which helped me. And then I went to Lafayette, Indiana, which is where Purdue is. And so it's a small television station and you got to do everything, but they had tremendous sports. And they played Notre Dame at home every other year, Michigan, Wisconsin. So you got to see a lot of great football players come through. And it really kind of gave you the foundation on the sports side, because I thought that's where I would go. So then I went from there a couple hours up the road to Kalamazoo, Michigan. Sounds like a small town, kind of is, but it was the second largest CBS in the state, because Detroit at the time did not have CBS. So they'd ask us to cover things. So I covered the Stanley Cup and Derek Jeter at the first time he played, who was from Kalamazoo, first time he played with the Yankees in the Comerica Park, which is where they play now. And we got to shoot in the well so you basically looked into the Yankees dugout, and that was the great Yankees teams with Jeter and Posada and, Don Zimmer and Joe Torre and all that. So that's like a great memory. But TV started to change just a little bit at that point too. And you started hearing more about budget, got to cut here, got to, kind of cut a little corner here and there. And it just wasn't the same. And I went into news from sports. And, that was still fun. Like I said, the Country Music Awards was great. And kind of funny, it was in one of the hotels in Las Vegas and was trying to get in to get something for lunch real quick. And I heard this voice behind me that I recognized instantly. And it was Dick Clark. If you remember the old American Bandstand and Dick Clark's Rockin' Eve and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Here's Dick Clark behind me, and a small town Oklahoma guy never thought you'd ever see Dick Clark, but TV just kept changing. And so I wanted to do something different, had a small child. I was doing a morning show and I was going to bed before my son, who was less than 1 year old. And I knew I got to do something different. And so started looking, and the Michigan Credit Union League wanted to start a video program. That was the basis of why they really hired me. I'll tell you the other thing that was funny is I interviewed with the CEO and then the VP who became my boss. I hardly talked. They talked a lot. That was always a key to somebody, is I hardly talked, they talked. And at the end they said, man, I got a good feeling about you. And you're like, I hardly talked, but I had a video background. They want to start the video. So if you go to Michigan Credit Union League now, you will see Cube TV. Me and another guy started Cube TV in a conference room, little by little by little, and it turned into that. But I also have to give credit to Dave Adams, who was the CEO at the time. He had a real vision of seeing that video was going to be more prevalent in not just in a broadcast sense, that you would be able to do it on any number of different ways. And then my direct boss there went down and took over Florida and Alabama League and turned it into the League of Southeastern Credit Unions. We always wanted to get south. And so that got us down here, and here I am. Do we still have time for any other questions, or is that it?
Man, I absolutely. I hope you have more time, because we're just getting started. I think this is so wildly interesting. And mostly, and obviously, we've had a number of conversations before coming into this conversation today. What I think gives you that unique perspective is, in sports, in, the artistic, nature, even like, country music. Country music, every single song is a story, right? Every match that's played, that's what makes sports so exciting, is that you can't predict what is going to happen. And the post-game analysis, the storytelling of what has happened, is really the build-up to it, which is where I think you drive a lot of that experience in your 17-year career to now the credit union, and most specifically to engagement. When you mentioned that television was changing, it was likely because of a lot of the technology that was changing as well. And so there's a lot of great parallels, not one that is common, which is why we were so excited to have you aboard. So, looking at the member experience and storytelling, maybe you can talk a little bit about how storytelling has driven member engagement today, and, some of the changes that you're looking at in video or social, what your social strategy is going to look like. And I'd love to pick your brain there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when video got cheaper, like the first camera that I used, anybody that knows anything about TV, years ago, the name Ikegami would have, resonated with you because that's the camera that you use. That camera was probably $50,000. You barely learning how to use it and it falling out of the truck, you falling down with it, everything else. You didn't think about it being $50,000. Well, it's down now to where the DSLR
Right.
can give you, and people are shooting movies and complete music videos with their phones because everything is so much better than it was. So you knew that you could get into the video, you could get into storytelling, and then you could have a more, multi-channel approach to your marketing that didn't just have to be a static ad or it didn't have to be a brochure. And now you could have a bunch of different things with it, but you have to be able to tell a story, which is a beginning, a middle, and an end. If
Right.
you watch a 30-second commercial, it's a beginning, middle, and end. You
True.
watch the Super Bowl ads, it's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you have to keep that in mind as you're doing the video, but as you're also doing, to me, campaigns. What is it that we're trying to say? What is the crux of it? And then what does it do for them? You have to look at it from their standpoint. And that's what the beauty of credit unions is. Not every credit union does that, but that helps tremendously if you can look at it. How am I filling a need? How am I offering something that we think they want? And then what's the story that we can tell in there? And then what can we tell through the various channels? And we have more channels today than we've ever had.
Yeah. Do you find that these channels resonate more with different age demographics? The coveted piece is always trying to get younger, members, and I think we think of social media strategy really directed at them. But I think every age, demographic uses some sort of media. I mean, my God, we definitely all do. But talk a little bit about how you measure that, what the social strategy is, maybe some of the biggest surprises in terms of member engagement that you've had in using channels. What's your experience there?
Earlier this year, we have a little bit more of a social media strategy. So some people may be watching this going, all right, so social media, not like we haven't been doing that, but we wanted to put more of an emphasis on it. And one of the things that we've always tried to do at 5-Star is we don't look at our competitors. And I remember a credit union CEO telling me that he used to park his credit union like branded truck across the street from another credit union. And he's like, that was so funny. Well, I mean, yeah, it's funny, but it's funny internally to you and the other credit union, but it means nothing to the member because the member's not switching back and forth. Most people are, it's like a crock pot. They want to set it and forget it. That's exactly what you want to do. I want to get in my bank. I want to get in my credit union and I don't want to have to worry about anything. And so you always have to kind of keep that in mind. And so what we always tried to do and still trying to do it is measure ourselves against what is going on right now in the world, what is going on right now and how people are consuming their content. And it's social media. I mean, it just plain and simple it is. And we still get people coming to our website, but most credit unions, the ones that are listening to this, are probably top heavy like we all are, which is we have the older generation has a lot of the money that is in there, but you're starting to have more money at the lower end than you did before. Very first job, I'll ask you this question. Very first job I ever had, professional job, I moved away from home, $12,000 a year. How much was yours?
18.
So you talk about a different era, and it's not like, hey, old man, stop talking. I get, but there's more money in the system today than there was, but credit unions are still top heavy. So as you think about your different channels, Facebook is still one for us that is going to be a little bit of the older generation. You think about probably late 30s, 40s, 50s and up, and we get a lot of good interaction that way. But with the Instagram, you can see it's a little bit of a younger crowd, and we know that. So we're putting our marketing messages up slightly different on each of them. And we'll roll out TikTok here in a little bit, and which made it sound like I'm going to do it here on the podcast, but no, a little bit later in the fall. But when I've looked at other financial institutions and how they're using TikTok and the things, they're using all of it the same, which is, hey, my phone is always everywhere. Hang on. So it's like, hey, let me all right, tell me about such and such. And the person's like up against the wall and they're talking, and it's not content.
Right.
It's just somebody talking. And
Right.
then they post that on everything. And it's just, it's different, ways to consume it. So that's how we've tried to do that and really think through what that content is, because you can get caught up in, why am I not tagging you when I put a post up? In the old days, you used to tag like the companies and all that other stuff. Well, the algorithm has changed and it's more based on keywords. So I want to make sure that I'm posting something about mortgage, and I say mortgage, home ownership, those kinds of things. Because now if you search Facebook for, houses for sale or something like that, our content will come up in there because it's
Yeah.
now based on keywords. So you have to know that as you're going in. And what we're seeing as we're measuring this better, and Facebook really does a great job of their metrics are so much better than they used to be, that we can see that when we put good quality content that's got good keywords in it, and I'm not saying hashtags, but good keywords in it, we can see that a lot of non-followers see our content. And so that's really driven us to be more content oriented, more of a thought process to it, and not go, here's our piece of content, now put it all the way across the board. It's like, here's our content. This one's a little different. This one's a little different. This one's a little different. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It totally does. In fact, what you're touching on is probably why a lot of organizations that have not been typical in the financial services space, and I'm talking about like the Googles, the Apples, why they're getting engaged into financial services. And that is because if I'm interested in purchasing a home or purchasing a car, the first place that I'm going is not my financial institution. I'm either downloading an app like Zillow, or I'm researching, cars on, whatever, Carvana, or, a local dealership. And Google knows what my search is, or Facebook knows what my search is, or wherever it is that I'm searching, it'll capture that. And so to your point, if the credit union is using the right, kind of wording, it's matching what the search engine is looking at and what the providers are looking at. And this is why I think some of them are starting to get engaged in financial services, because they have the gap that the credit union doesn't see. You get the look. Now, once I've found what it is that I want, well, now I have to go to my financial institution to figure out, well, can I afford what it is that I want? But I've been doing a lot of searching ahead of time, and there could be some really great conversations beforehand about financial planning, about services, about access, about, the overall KYC of the member before I start going in. I may think my budget is $1 million for a home. I may only qualify for half of that, right? And then my heart is broken because I've done all this work and I feel like my dreams have been shattered, as opposed to working together, that if I do want this $1 million home, well, these are the steps that I need to take, and this is where I need to go. I think it makes a ton of sense, and it is different than what I have heard, at least in conversations in terms of marketing and what social media is.
So here's a good story for you. So
yeah,
the CEO of the credit union sent me a picture of a Facebook post that his wife had seen. Stick with me here. So the CEO's wife sends it to him and says, "This is cool." He sends it to me, and it is a member of ours whose 8-year-old daughter, 9-year-old daughter had gotten one of her checks and made the check out for $200 to herself. And the mother posted it saying, "Isn't this cute?" And the audacity to make it out to herself or whatever. That was funny. So I saw they were a member, talked to the financial center in that town and said, "Let's try to get the little girl in here and let's cash her check." So she comes in, good personality, cash the check, get pictures, everything. I send it to, it's a smaller town in Georgia, just across the border from Alabama, and they're a weekly paper. So I send it to them, and I know they'll put it in there, but they're not going to put it in there for 5 more days. Right. I send it to the local press here in Dothan, which is a little bit bigger city, about 75,000. They don't do anything with it. But we boost it, and Facebook now has their own kind of technology that will look at your members and send it out to your followers, and send it out to similar followers that might consume that. And now I can go back and say, we got 30,000 views and 72% of those views were not followers of ours. So I can quantitatively say, which is actually not a word, but is that we got 30,000 people that looked at it, and the bulk of those 20,000 plus have not been followers of ours of seeing our content. I couldn't say that if it was in the paper, and the paper ran it later, but they don't do anything with social media. So you'd had to physically get the paper if you have it. So that's a way of thinking modern and not get caught up in we always, this is how we always do media. If that makes sense. And one other piece of that, we're in so many small towns in Alabama and Georgia that some towns don't have billboards. Some towns have a weekly newspaper, things like that. So that those aren't being consumed, but you do know that social media is being consumed. So you have to have the discipline to do what your plan is, which is to reach them that way, because we know they're all on their phone, regardless of what size of town you live in and what age, you're on your phone in some way.
For sure. And everybody is. It's incredibly rare that somebody isn't with those phones, right? And like you just did before, you reached over to get it. Mine is in another room, and I'm sure that, when I get back, the first thing I'm going to look at are the messages in each one of the channels that I've got, right? What did I miss? It's that fear of missing out, that FOMO piece.
Right.
Mike, if you had maybe a little advice of, a team or, a group, even if marketing isn't necessarily their strong point, what would be some of the advice for some that are listening to this, like where to get started? And this could be in a number of different channels. It could be in lending. It could be in collections. It could be in just overall member services. What's the first place that you're helping to point them to look at?
What I would say, as much as anything, is do not judge yourself against peers. And that's be the first thing. A lot of times the CEO will say, well, what is the peers doing? Or a third party will say, here's what your peers are. Well, your peers, for the most part, aren't your competitors.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so what we try to do is let's measure ourselves against what is modern and what is hot right now. So how is Apple putting their marketing together? I mean, how many times have you seen a new phone get out and that you see some different kind of marketing, and it's just beauty shots of the phone that makes you like, I got to have that phone, unless you do research and you realize there's really not that much difference in the phone or whatever. But so that's what we do. We look at when we have our weekly meeting, what I start off the weekly meeting is, what was something good from the weekend? What is something that you enjoyed from the weekend that might be out of the ordinary? What are some shows you're watching? Things like that. It gets us thinking, not like a bank and not like, here's the overwhelming amount of work we have to do. It gets you in a good frame of mind. And now let's talk about how we're going to put the content together and not go, hey, did you see our competitors doing this or your competitors doing that? I'll tell you a great story. This is a great story. So I'm getting let go from the television station. So anytime you start a story that's great and you're getting fired is not great. But so I'm getting let go. And on my last day, they would not let me say on the air, hey, it's been a great, thank you for everything, blah, blah, blah. They just thought, let me just take them off the air and nobody will notice. You know what I mean? I'll stop it right there. I was in the live truck. You've seen the live truck with the little thing that goes up, and everything. Driving 40 miles an hour, a guy drives up, looks up, sees me in the car, asks to roll down the window, and asks me what happened. So, I mean, you got to give him, 15 seconds or something like that on air just to say goodbye. They don't do that.
Right.
I could do a whole podcast on how TV's not run very well, but so the director of our morning show said, how would you like to end? And I'm like, well, I'm not supposed to do anything. Well, The Sopranos had just happened and they had that controversial ending.
Yep.
So I said, we're going to do Sopranos ending. So we're going to end 10 seconds early. We're going to go to black and that'll be it. This will be great. This will be great. So everything goes as it is. My boss, the news director, that's who the manager is, calls me in and she is livid. She's livid. She goes, how could you do that? You never go to black. That's the first rule of television. You never go to black. And I said, Sopranos ending. I said, first of all, it's a story you'll tell the rest of your life that
Yeah.
somebody had the audacity to do this with Sopranos ending. And I said, second of all, you wouldn't let me say goodbye. So that was my way of saying goodbye. And she said, when you go to black, it makes people think that the station went off the air. I said, do you think somebody said, well, that's it. Let me get the remote. You mean there's other television stations? But that reinforces to you that you can get into that mode of thinking that you think that you think people are just like going around. They're not. They get comfortable, and that's what they want to do, So always have the perspective of what is out there. How are people consuming things? And then the advice would be then bring that into your shop and start thinking about your content and how you're doing things. Don't think like a bank. Think, how are people consuming things today, and how are they seeing it? And can I replicate that within budget?
I love it. This all tailors to the storytelling, the culture, the reason why we're wearing, jerseys. Wildly fascinating because it changes the idea or the perspective of how to think. And I think every organization or every group that does think different to how everybody else does, that's where you get noticed. Now, Five Stars had an interesting run. You were speaking about don't think like a bank, do this.
Yeah.
There's been some acquisitions, and I believe Five Stars acquired 2 different banks in terms of this. Now, how do you bridge the culture of not 1, but 2 banks that have bank culture into the credit union? And so what was, merging those markets together and those teams together like?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the bigger pieces of that is it starts before the merger, and you go and let everybody talk and, everybody meet. And then, a big thing is listening. What do you think's going well? What do you think is not going well? One of the things I've always said, if I go into a new place, is what do you like doing? What do you not like doing? And as the boss in my area, let's just switch up. You take this and I'll take these things you don't like, because there's good parts of everything and there are bad parts of everything. And I think what we need to do is go in there, listen. What are the good things? Don't change the good things. And then what are the bad things? Can we have some solutions that will help? And one of the banks is in a small area, smaller towns or whatever. So how can we support you in some of the things that maybe you wanted to do that the bank couldn't do? Because sometimes those kinds of things happen too. And they're very heavy commercial as well. So they hadn't been doing as much consumer. So a lot of them, the employees enjoyed the fact that we could offer our own credit card, offer auto loans, offer mortgage, things like that. So a lot of it is just kind of getting everybody onto the same page and getting, everybody kind of out of their comfort zone, including us, and getting us all together, but having things like anniversary week and all the pictures that we've gotten from all the way across the financial centers. They've really enjoyed it because their personality can come out and things like that. And so just like everything else, listening is the start to everything.
Wise words. The M&A activity has been pretty active over the last couple of years, and I think it's going to continue to be active. In fact, for those that have been listening to the podcast a little while, I started this journey with a counterpart of mine, Laura Chambers. Shout out to Laura, because without Laura, the marketing side of where we were before, we would never be here where we are today. And it started with Lexop, and Eltropy had acquired Lexop back in January, and now we go through our cultural kind of merge together. And I don't know if there's any merger that is always just a perfect puzzle piece that you just place and everything just works. There's 2 of everything, and it's understanding, okay, well, now who's going to be on first, what's on second, where's on third, or whatever that Three Stooges analogy or story kind of is.
Abbott and Costello.
Abbott and Costello,
yes.
That's what it is. And you gotta work through those things, and it does start a little bit on the pre-side, and then of course the things that you don't see, and you kind of work through it, and it all comes down to communication.
Yeah, and how can we support you? And what are some areas, like some of it could be, what are some of the sponsorships that you guys have done? Should we do more? and maybe you couldn't have done more, and,
Yep.
what we always like to say is we don't want to be a logo on a t-shirt. So if you have the opportunity to do a sponsorship, maybe we do a little bit more than we've done in the past. And maybe we try to fill a need. Sometimes we'll go to schools and say, instead of giving you $1,000 for a sign on the fence, what do you need? Soccer team needed bags, so we got them bags. One of them wanted a cooling system, so we were able to get one cooling system. Lowe's saw how good that was, and so they threw in the other one. So where can we help you and make an impact and not just be a logo?
But we've been talking a lot about the merging between organizations. How did this translate to embracing members? Now that you have the integration of banks, now they're moving from customers to members. How did that resonate with now new members to the family? And what were some of the things of credit union culture that were different? And what do you think you guys did great? And what's something that maybe if you had to do it all over again, you'd probably maybe make a change?
Well, one of the bigger pieces is FDIC. I mean, one of the things that FDIC did great years ago was member FDIC. Like every commercial, member FDIC. And so people remember that as FDIC, not knowing that NCUA insurance is the exact same as FDIC. So that was a little bit more of a education than I kind of thought it would be, because I'd not gone through that before. So really thinking through communications, really thinking through letters. So we sent a couple of letters to the new members in the new acquisitions to kind of ease their mind that all of your money is safe and sound. And really anybody listening, no credit union member has ever lost money with a bank, the financial institution closing or things like that in the history of credit unions. And so that education was part of it. And then getting out of your comfort zone of, well, here's the brochure we have. Well, maybe that brochure is geared to someone who's been a credit union member for a while, not someone who hasn't. So we kind of recreated some things with the NCUA to have those on site. And then the competitors in the town a lot of times say, well, they're not going to be here a long time and they're not insured like we are and blah, blah, blah. And so there was some education there of not to panic when somebody would come in and say, hey, I want to take my $500,000 out or $750,000 out, not to panic, and have some education there. So I think we've done a good job with that. I think if we had to go back and do something again, I think it would be even more training. And if our trainer was on here, she would probably go, we were there a lot. But I think we learned a lot of, you kind of took for granted a little bit that they would understand being new credit union staff, the credit union way, and it probably was not as clear as it could have been.
It's a good takeaway. I think that the communication on that part goes so far and much further than I think we realize. And in multiple use cases, like I'm just thinking of that, even in my profession, like if we were to explain and somebody were to say, well, what is Eltropy or what was Lexop or what was, any of the employment that I had, sometimes you take for granted, right? And you assume that the person knows. And when you assume and you cut that corner, you leave a gap, and that gap is filled by whatever that individual thinks. And it could be fear. And you miss the mark. And what you think is maybe a given, all of a sudden you've opened up Pandora's box and they are on a different train track. And they're going down a very different path than what you thought they were going to go through. And I think that works for both the internal teams as well as external members and everybody in between. And so it's communication. Stick to the basics. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit because we've also had a chance to talk a little bit about advocacy, governmental affairs. You're very active in this area. Emphasize a little bit the importance of advocacy for credit unions and leaders at all levels.
And that was one of the things that I learned at the Michigan Credit Union League is they're very active, and the credit unions there have a very strong hold in with their legislators. So that was kind of the first time that I saw the value of that. In TV, you kind of cover it but you don't really have a lot of those relationships the way that credit unions have really tried to do. I did a podcast way back then, produced the podcast for the Michigan Credit Union League, and our second or third guest at the time was a representative, Gretchen Whitmer. So, who later, that was kind of funny to see her become governor. So at the time you saw her as she was really just getting into politics in a way. So that was kind of fun. But I saw the value of that. Then when I went to the League of Southeastern Credit Unions, because the CEO had come from Michigan, I mean, it's advocacy is a big part of the credit union leagues and of America's credit unions and things like that. And so I was able to get a little bit closer into it there because we were putting on events. I was doing a lot more of the marketing of it and the communication side of it. And so they were very close. Like Matt Gates at the time was state representative, and they had a good relationship with him. I could tell you that when they had the Republican National Convention in Tampa, we held this event, and that was the one where Mitt Romney was running on the Republican side, and had an event, and a person walks in and said, "Hey, I was told I should get to know the credit unions or whatever." It was a man and his wife, and we're like, "Sure, blah blah blah." Ron DeSantis. And so that kind of starts, and so you can see where he is today, probably going to run for president, but you can go all the way back that he had to beat the streets and get a lot of people kind of support on his side. But the good example is we stood behind him then. And so now Florida credit unions have a very good relationship with him now as governor. And now if he were to become president, let's say, now you can walk in there and you can talk about your issues and he'll be familiar with you. And so here in Alabama, the CEO and the chief operations officer were very active. And then when I came on, I kind of joined them in that activity. And so we have a good relationship with our local representatives, which is very important because they'll make statewide decisions, but we can talk to them and say, "Hey, if you do this, this is how it affects members." And sometimes they think about that, sometimes they don't. And on the national level, you just kind of have to go in there time and time again. And a good example of that would be Tommy Tuberville, Auburn's football coach, not really taken, as someone that's probably very good at politics, even though he won the Senate race. He becomes a pretty good senator. I think people know him because he's a Trump supporter. And so he kind of becomes a well-known figure. We meet with him on a regular basis. Well, now he's going to run for governor in Alabama. So again, you see that you can't go in and meet somebody and think to themselves, well, they're not going to be that great because they used to be a football coach. Well, we don't know what's going to happen. So now we can go in and have a conversation with him, and he knows us as credit unions. And same thing in Georgia. A guy is running from one of our areas in Macon, and one of our business lenders knows him personally. And so when we meet with him, he comes with us and they have a personal conversation. They live in the same neighborhood. Well, he's running for lieutenant governor. So if he wins lieutenant governor, he's one step away from being governor. So again, we can talk to his issues. That doesn't mean he's going to do everything for us, but we can talk about our issues and he knows us. And that helps tremendously because it's all not trying to make 5-star more money. It's trying to do things for the members that makes it easier for us to lend and do all kinds of other things.
I could not agree more. And this is where, one of my questions that I'm going to ask, and right after I kind of talk about this, what's the most important, legislative or regulatory issue that you're tracking right now? I think I know what it is, but, this is where we get into the, don't tax my credit union, kind of campaign. And I am imagining that you've also had lots of meetings with people that they did not get to that level. They were not the governors or lieutenant governors or running for president or some of the names that you've mentioned, but some did. And it's having those good relationships that will also ensure that you also have a voice that carries weight to that next level because you've given them that support. But if I had to backtrack, most important regulatory issue that you're tracking right now, what is it that you guys are looking at and what you're trying to campaign for?
Before I go forward with that, The League of Southeastern Credit Unions has a very, very good governmental affairs in all three states, and they have great contacts. It's probably the best group that the League has had since I've been aware of the League, which is, going on 15 years now. A couple of the people really, really close to Katie Britt. So when we go to Washington or she comes to Alabama, you can have a personal conversation with her, and she'll always say, I love so-and-so and so-and-so at the League. So that just lends a little bit more to the conversations you have because she has those personal relationships. And she's actually from our area. We did not know her, but another credit union does. So again, that just gives you that because credit unions collaborate on it. The issue, which is different, we'll take a little bit of a different approach here. I don't think that credit unions will be taxed. And, the bank, it's one of the issues that they try to get, but most of our legislators will always say, I don't want to choose between the two.
Right.
And if you tax credit unions, you're choosing the bank. And they do know that there's 100 million, credit union members or whatever we have. So that's not one that we particularly think is probably going to happen. In our states, as much as anything, is credit unions can't take public deposits in Alabama and Georgia. So if you have a personal relationship with a school or, municipality or whatever, they can't put their money with a credit union. And in the two areas where we had the bank acquisitions, they had strong relationships with some municipalities, and they had to sell off those public deposits. And one of the things that we've talked about in both states is that exactly is, we had to almost sever those relationships just because it says FDIC insured in the state statute instead of federally insured. So we should be in the business of competition. We should be in the business of you can shop around for the best rate on what you have. So that's a big issue for us. And interchange is another big issue for us. If you know that if there is a data breach somewhere, that by law we can't say to our membership, stop using your card at such and such retail, because it's in the federal statute that we can't say that. And so, and interchange is getting whittled down to the point in Alabama, you can go into an entity and it will say, if you use a card, 3% will be added to your total or whatever. And that once again is pushing it off to the consumer. So it's basically another tax on the consumer. And I do it and it makes me mad, but that's something that really needs to be looked at very, very hard, that we can, that's another way that we can kind of take that tax off, because the business likes the cards because they get their money instantly. And I always say, do you want us to go back to checks? You think Walmart wants to go back to checks?
Or anybody?
Yeah. Yeah. So those are two of the bigger issues that we're trying to work on. And, both of them are a little difficult, but public deposits in Florida has got a little bit of a stronghold, which helps. And so hopefully we can start to get in our states, because our current governor was a banker. So she said, I'm not going to, I would never sign that bill. But we actually met with Tuberville a couple of weeks ago and, just talk about those things. And, he might be a little bit more open to it. That's not to say he'll do it, but might be open to at least start to have the conversation, because then you could put the bill in and maybe it doesn't get very far first year, it goes a little farther second year, things like that.
Yeah. I think the issue of the interchange, especially on the collection side, because that's where I kind of sit most. There's there's a word that is the most important in the collections use case, which is the word of empathy. And so when you start tacking on an additional 3% or 5% or additional fees, it becomes the opposite of empathetic, right? And very, very taxing to the consumer. Then that translates back to the credit union. Then the credit union is forced to kind of do some things in order to keep operations going forward.
Well, and when the Durbin Amendment went through, one of the things that we said right away is that this is just going to be passed on to the consumer. And of course they said, no, that's not going to happen. And, study after study has shown that has gone straight to the consumer. So once again, the consumer has to, eat that. And who stands up for the consumer as much as anybody? The credit union does. Correct. Because we want to make it easy for our membership to be able to get what they need. And adding extra tax, knowing that if you want to eat out or you want to use at certain smaller places, you want to support small businesses, but it's hard to when you have to add that on there.
I totally agree. It becomes a non-people first mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the whole idea of people helping people is the mantra of credit unions.
Yes.
Yeah, and again, lead with that empathy. In fact, maybe I'll put you on the spot, maybe not. I would love to hear how, you've spoken or we've spoken before about meeting members where they are, not expecting them to be forced into one thing or the next. How do you put that into practice? And of course, maybe a story or two on, where empathy has changed the outcome for a member that you've experienced and how you guys go about doing that.
Well, I can tell you that when we have our own data team, and they're overwhelmed because as soon as they came in, they were like the new person at school. Every department jumped on them and said, I need this, 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 and this, but the more that we get into our membership and can really start to segment them out and look at it, a lot of it is these small towns, they don't have a lot of revenue. So we had started a foundation in 2020, and one of the bigger needs we saw right now is, can we help more people in our communities have access to a college education? Right. So we gave grants at 5 colleges that are kind of in our footprint to help at least pay for your senior year or your as if I'm learning about this the first time, the freshman year. And some of them they're community colleges, but one of them is a nursing school and some other things. So that one scholarship might follow them their entire time because their needs are different than just here's one semester, here's the next semester or whatever. So after a couple of years, we started endowing. So now we've endowed, and 3 of the colleges have $100,000 endowment. 2 of them have $50,000. The $50,000, while it sounds less, goes just as far because the education is less there. So that's a way that we looked at. We want to be part of the solution, which is trying to help more people get access to education. And another way that we have what's called an express loan, which is a payday loan alternative. And so I didn't have a lot of experience with that. It wasn't quite sure kind of how we want to market that, but it's very much a word of mouth. So about 4 years ago, we ran a thing said, tell us your 5-star moment. Right. And so many of them were tied to the express loan of, I needed money because my child needed medicine. These are true stories. I'm not making that up. Yeah. My windshield got blown out and I needed quick access. You guys were there and I had my windshield the next day. A lady said that her mother had terminal illness and they got an express loan to take her to Disney. And so she said, we talk about that trip so much and she's since passed. So they were able to get access to that cash to be able to do that. And not every financial institution does that or has the expertise to do that, but that's something that probably changed in my mind of what that payday loan, payday alternative did for somebody in our membership. And the way we have it structured is you can't do it it's not like a payday loan, the way that they structure it. It's more structured that our hope is we can structure it this way and start to work to get you out of the need for that express loan.
So anybody that has listened to the podcast before, anybody that has seen me on stage, I think for 2 years, I'm surprised that I haven't been sent death letters yet from that industry. I am on a kick to try to, curtail the use of payday lending just because of the exorbitant amount of interest that is covered. It is predatory in nature. It should be capped. I stand by what I said. I love that you guys are doing this. This is exactly the rallying cry, that a few have been screaming over the last couple of years. It's these heartfelt loans. And of course, you have to balance the risk versus what, the portfolio is. But I dare say that you guys are not at 500, 600% of ARR on any of this.
And we also have it set up to where it doesn't prey on them as well. And there's some education part of that. We make it easy for them to get it, but we also make it easy to be able to talk to them about Would it be better if we did this? Can we get you a credit card
Yeah.
instead, and kind of get you in the credit card, which is going to help your credit score and things like that. So it's not just, marketing to them that, hey, we have the express loan. If you want another one, it's not like that.
Yeah. Keep them trapped in that
Right.
wheel
Right.
or that cyclone. Kudos to you and the team for doing that and executing on it. It really is a rallying cry. And again, I don't say this because it's untrue. I think literally every single podcast that I've encountered, I find a way, to kind of bring that up. And so I love that you guys
right. And, you talk about advocacy. I can remember, I was talking with, it sounds like I'm a big pro Tuberville guy, but it just seems like these conversations came up in our conversations with him. And I was talking to his chief of staff, and I said, one thing to remember, especially for the state of Alabama and Georgia and the cities we're in, it's a lot of paycheck, gap, paycheck. People aren't even living paycheck to paycheck. It's paycheck, gap to paycheck. And then you go in these small towns and there's just not a lot of industry in there. Used to, you could work in the factory, you could work in a couple of different businesses. Some of them, there's just not that many businesses anymore. And in a lot of the towns we're in, there's no public transportation. Dothan, upwards of 120,000 people every day are in town. There's no public transportation. So if there's not a job close to you and you don't have a vehicle, you can't jump on the bus and go to the area where there's a lot of industry, so you have to think about those things and how can you be a solution and not, more part of the problem.
It actually ties back to how you were introing the beginning of this and how you communicate in the story. It's meeting them not where you are, the truck in front of, the other credit union. It's not for you. It's for the member. And so are you meeting them, mentally, physically, digitally where they are, and then creating the relationship, from that piece? I think it is a different way of looking at the equation, and then
it really is. And I don't want, I recently saw a credit union ad. I'm not going to say who it is. I'm not going to say what the ad is because they'll know who it is. But we talk about it in the marketing department after we saw that ad, and it's, who are you going after? It's like such a niche giveaway that it makes no sense whatsoever, because this doesn't have the member in mind, and it's their problem, not my problem, and we just happen to see it. But it was one of those where it's like the decisions made for this were made for, how can this get us business, as opposed to, are we helping the member? If we help the member, we do it correctly, the business will come.
That sound bite we're going to clip. That is the essence of a credit union. That is the mission. Yeah. That is the reason why everybody is so passionate about this. Mike, I know we're coming up to time. I do probably about 40 conferences over the course of the year. Are you doing anything? Do you do anything over the course of the year? Are there places that you go to that people may, kind of walk up to you and ask you questions? What do you participate in?
Well, we always go to the CUNA GAC or the GAC now and take part in that, and have done a lot of things with that over the years, and know a lot of people. So it's always good to go to that and talk more to your peers and things of what they're doing, knowing in other states and stuff like that. I have emceed a couple of conferences too, and so those have been good. But we do a little bit more of like online kind of learning here. Some of it is Adobe, kind of so we can perfect our content and things like that, and then trying to read as much as we can. But we really need to find, I went to Financial Brand a couple of years ago, and I really like that. And I'd like to go back to that because they really do a nice job of thinking differently, and one of the, it was kind of like an acquisition type thing, not acquiring other financial institutions, but other like business, which I didn't really think that was like a great idea. But I sat next to a community banker from Kansas, and turns out that she was having to deal with something that was the same thing I was having to deal with. And we exchanged information. And so it was a bank and a credit union talking. And you get to just meet other people that are going through the same thing, but not necessarily being around the same people always.
Right.
But Financial Brand does a great job. If you've never gone, or if anybody listening has never gone, take a look at that, because they really do a good job. I kind of wish it wasn't in Las Vegas, because I'm not a big Vegas person, but I understand why they have it there.
Likewise, my love for Las Vegas is a little bit different these
Yeah.
days after the number of conferences that are out there. No disrespect to anybody in Las Vegas or Las Vegas itself.
Yeah.
I would just like a little different background noise than the slot machines from time to time. Mike, any parting comments that you'd like to do as we wrap up here? Any either for early individuals in their marketing career to keep their eye out for someone with such a great history and leading the charge to this? Any parting comments to those that are earlier in their career?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me would be, don't be afraid to think differently. Don't feel like you have to think like a credit union person or think like a banker. Look at how the world works. Don't be rigid, and don't hold on to old concepts just because they seem like they worked then. And I'll tell you, one of the things that we come up against at times is, if I can't see it, is marketing doing anything for me? And so that again is an education of, we're doing a lot of the social media, but we're boosting that social media in areas so we can get more eyes on it. And it's not a billboard, and it's not in the newspaper, and it's not a postcard. So just because you can't physically see that doesn't mean that we're not doing something. Or digital ads, and the digital ads aren't following you, doesn't mean you're not doing anything. But get a plan, stick to the plan, and don't deviate from the plan if somebody doesn't quite understand it, or they don't think that it's working. Because if we don't give the plan enough time to try to work, then we don't know if it works. And it's okay if it doesn't. I mean, hopefully it doesn't cost you $10 million. But if the plan's not working, then we can tweak the plan. We can tweak some of the ways that we do it. We didn't even really talk about that. One of the things is, we work with a company that gives us pearls, personal URLs, and Eltropy doesn't really have a solution to where we could text that out, because we get a lot of good interaction with the text. So we worked, and we really kind of had to use this, sometimes they'll send you a spreadsheet. Here's all the different ways to use Eltropy. It was way at the bottom. It's like off to the side said, nobody ever uses this, but we were able to do it to where we can text out, mass text individual pearls. So you get the text, and when we say click this link, it's your individual link. We can't track it. That's the only bad part of it, but it did kind of force Eltropy to think differently, and us to think differently, and make it work. And we get our most success with the campaign. We do it quarterly. We get the most success with our campaign from texting. And so, find a solution.
Find a solution. So I was actually going to pivot to that, where, this is advice that's not just for those that are in marketing. It's, even challenge the group together of, if you want to think differently, well, how can we execute on that? Which means that change has to take place. And for the providers that are out there, maybe that means that we have to build a new tool in order to be able to execute it. But we need to create the vision of what it is that we want to do that is going to be different, right? Just because we did it yesterday doesn't mean that we do it again tomorrow,
right?
Especially if you want a better result,
right? And our CEO and our COO really have an atmosphere here where you can challenge them. They can say, hey, I'm thinking we should do this. Does anybody want to challenge that? And that doesn't mean challenge aggressively, but hey, do you have a different way that you want to think it through? And then, it's not kind of dictated from the top down. It's a collaborative effort. And one of the things that I think most of our vendors would say is, we do challenge them on the way that they do business, which expands, which in the end is only going to help them, because it shows it's a little bit different than even, you sold it to someone and then it can be used differently.
Yeah, 100%. What a great way to thank you for the time, Mike. Mike Bridges, Vice President of Marketing at 5-Star. Thank you for the time that you have dedicated. In fact, I know that, of a lot of these sessions, I've mentioned Laura Chambers before. She was our VP of Marketing, over at Lexop, and I stand by the comment that we would not have been anywhere where we were without her. And a lot of what she did was what you were talking about. Think outside of the box, be able to execute it. In fact, the whole reason why this podcast exists was because of her and another individual on the team. And it was something that I had never done before. And it was outside of the comfort box. And now all of a sudden we start to see a lot more podcasts and conversations that are happening like this. So I think it is a great thing. I think the more that everybody gets to share these stories, there are always these little golden nuggets that people find and then be able to consume and implement to their team, all with the hope of pushing everybody's agenda forward with the credit union space. So thank you for your time today, Mike. Greatly.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amazing. For those listening, this concludes our latest episode of Eltropy Exchange. And I can't wait to, bring you guys back for the next one. Mike, I hope we get one day to shake hands, face to face. We've had a few conversations behind the scenes. Sir, there is a lot to you that I admire quite a bit. And if you have a chance to meet Mike at any of these events, do so. You will be richly rewarded with his context, with his kindness, with his intelligence, and his creativity. And so big thank you on behalf of Eltropy to you, the relationship that we have with 5-Star. And I look forward to seeing and speaking to everybody again.
Yeah, thank you. And if anybody sees me, just come up and say hi, because I have no problem talking, as you can see.
And I think we can both agree that if we were on the ice, the Bruins would probably beat the Dallas Cowboys. However, on the field, the Dallas Cowboys would pummel the Boston Bruins. So at the end, we're even.
Yes, we'll call it a draw.
Perfect way to work. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll see you next time on the Eltropy Exchange. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Eltropy Exchange podcast. For more insights and resources, visit us at eltropy.com. We'll see you next time.